Good morning and welcome to today's New Canaan Beautification League meeting and program. I call the meeting to order. Just as the election had record turnout, so today we have the largest number of participants ever in our Zoom meeting. We send a shout out and greetings to all of our members, members of the New Canaan Garden Club, the Wellfleet Garden Club on Cape Cod, Kirsten's sister from Oregon, and my sister-in-law, Trudy, from New Jersey. So welcome everybody. The October presentation by Nancy Gorkin focused on houseplants, and one that she recommended was Begonia escargot. You can see the leaves look a lot like snails. And I have 8 of them, which I dug up just before the frost. They are all potted up. They've probably got some pine needles in them. But my slogan is gardens are for sharing. So I would like to share these and give them away to the first 8 people who contact me either by phone or by email, and that is for our members only. And I will arrange for pickup. Today, the preferred times would be today between 12 and 1, and tomorrow between 9 and 10. Now, so I hope that people will take advantage of this. You can have these plants inside, and then come warmer weather, which we will look forward to, you can bring them outside again. I love container gardening. And if you ever pass by my house at 1000 Ponus Ridge, you see that I go crazy with planting. In fact, I have 15 permanent pots around my house and garden landscape. They are wonderful accents, they're cheerful, they're surprises, and I've learned a lot about them. Now, I won't do all 15 for the holidays, but I'll probably do 8. And just like New Canaan Beautification League does the pots at Town Hall, so we change out our plants for the seasons. But many of the plants that I use, and some I'm sure that Jen Cipriano will show you today, are plants that can later find another location in your landscape. I have some that started out as small plants and are now 8 feet tall. So that's something to dream on and something to look forward to. So now I will turn the meeting over to Kirsten Gregorio, who will introduce our presenter today, Jennifer Cipriano from Copia. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's hard to believe that this is our 3rd Zoom program. I think we're all starting to get the hang of it finally. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Jennifer Cipriano. Jen grew up in Connecticut and has had a passion for gardening ever since she was a little girl, running around her grandma's garden. As a teenager, she worked at the famed Gloria's Garden Center, a landmark in Milford and one of the largest garden centers in New England, unfortunately now closed. While working there, Jen learned floristry and many aspects of running a retail garden center. She held internships at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where she developed a passion for horticultural education, and also the Denver Botanic Garden, where she learned many features of gardening, including developing perennial borders, xeriscaping, utilizing native plants, alpine gardens, and aquatic gardens. She met her husband, Peter, at Cornell University while they were both studying horticulture. They set out together to pursue the dream of having a garden center of their own that would offer not only exceptional plants, but also important horticultural knowledge in using plants. After leaving Peter's family-owned garden center on Long Island, They found the perfect spot to fulfill their dream, right on the border of Vista, New York and New Canaan, Connecticut. It is here that they settled down 10 years ago, and together with their two children, Isabella and Peter, they have built up the business that they have today, Copia Home and Garden. In Jen's words, they strive to create a place where clients can feel inspired to enhance their homes and landscapes, equipped with the best horticultural knowledge and most eco-friendly materials possible. From the time Peter and Jen opened Copia, they have been so welcoming and willing to help anyone who walks in. They have great collections of plants and supplies, and whether you are a beginning gardener or a master gardener, they're happy to answer your questions. Their website points out that copia in Latin means abundant. It says, at Copia, we strive to help make sure your gardens grow abundantly and celebrate wholeheartedly what nature bestows. Peter and Jen particularly love native plants and pollinators and have helped the Beautification League with their native plant sale, sharing a portion of the proceeds with NCBL to buy plants for Lee Garden. They have long been honorary members of the Beautification League, and this year, Jen joined our advisory board. They have been extremely generous to us with their time, knowledge, and resources. When I asked Jen what title she would like us to give her program, she said emphatically, Porch Pots. I went with that until someone said we need to call them decorative winter porch pots. So whatever we call them, I know the results will be spectacular. I can't wait to learn how to create my own. So now let's welcome Jen Cipriano.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kirsten and Carol, and thank you for inviting me today. Perfect timing. We had deep, cold temperatures last Friday that killed off quite a bit of what was in our containers already, so I'm so thrilled and happy to show you what you can do with your planters now, utilizing two different techniques. One style, we will be using live plants, and as Carol mentioned, it's a wonderful way to be sustainable and to be able to reuse or replant the live plants after the winter into your garden. And then the second way we're going to style our planters is using cut stemmed greens, different types of greenery and branches and so forth. Very similar to how you would use cut flowers in styling. And actually, that's how you want to look at styling your planters. In a sense, it is like flower arranging. And I use the basics of styling containers the same way I would style containers in the spring or in the summer. I use those same basic concepts for doing my fall and winter planters as well. And those three key words, I'm sure you've heard before, are thrill, fill, and spill. So thrill is height and plants or cut stems that add height and excitement to your planter. The fillers fill the rest of the planter out. And the spillers, of course, add depth and that element of movement flowing down the planter. Some people don't want to add that kind of element, or you may not want to add too much height, and that's okay. You can make adjustments based upon your style and your planters. So I'd actually like to open up a little bit of polling discussion to start to learn how much experience you may have with styling your planters at home. So I'd like to ask you all, have you styled planters for the winter before? And if so, how many of you were using live plants? Or how many of you were using cut stems, like cut greenery and so forth? I'd just love to get an idea of, and get a sense of what you all have been doing. So I am going to jump right into our first segment, and please answer the poll question as we go along, and then Patricia will share the feedback with me in a little bit. So I'm going to start with the live plant segment of styling your planters. A few basic things.
And I'm Jen, I'm going to interrupt you so that, you know, let me just give you the results of what we've got here.
Great.
Share the results with everybody. So it looks like 50% of the people use greens, 24% have not done, and another 15% use live plants. So they're the more ambitious ones in my book.
Ah, great. That's wonderful. Okay, terrific. So I'm glad we're venturing into something new maybe for most of us with the live plants. And like I said, it's really a great way to utilize live plants to be able to use them at the end of the winter in your garden and think about things in a more sustainable way. And so I actually am going to introduce some of these characters first. But let me talk a little bit about basics of prepping your containers. Before the meeting started, someone had mentioned because we had the freeze, everything is sort of dead and so forth. So you want to clean all of that root and plant matter and root matter, throw it in the compost and fluff up your potting soil. Just reuse the potting soil that you have. If you have to enhance it, use, we love to use Gardener's Gold because it has a little bit of compost in it and it has a little more heft to it that can support some of these plants because most of these are actually small shrubs. And so we don't want them to dry out with drying winter winds and so forth. So adding a little compost to the planter when you're prepping it is very helpful. Hopefully at the beginning of the season, you address the drainage, and if not, make sure that you address the drainage. Make sure that your planters are draining well. And no matter what material the planter is made of, some materials are better than others, but more importantly, if the planters drain for the winter, you should get through the winter with no problems in terms of freezing and cracking and things like that. The way to address that is to be sure that the drainage holes are not flush to the ground on the bottom, and that you can do by just lifting the planter up with pot feet or down under lifters, they're called. It's just a plastic X that goes under the planter. You don't see it. It just lifts the planter up enough to allow it to drain. And also adding drainage material to the bottom of the planter is very helpful too. We like to use pine bark nuggets. That's the most economical, but I particularly love Soil Perfector. It's from Espoma. It's basically like a clay lava nugget. That's it's fairly lightweight, and not only does it add drainage in the bottom of the planter, but it it almost absorbs the moisture that might settle at the bottom. And absorbing that moisture will prevent the freezing, the expansion and thawing and so forth that might allow the planter to crack. So that's the basics of prep for the planters. And now we're ready we've got our soil nice and soft and workable, and we're ready to style our planter here. And I'm going to do a more natural mixed planter, but certainly I'm going to show you as well something a little more refined and contemporary as well. Maybe that's a good time to ask our second poll question. What style do you all prefer? Do you like a more traditional style, or do you prefer a more contemporary style? And Patricia will help us with the results of that as well. Okay, so we want height, and I'm going to start with this lovely Hollywood juniper. Now, of course, you're gonna scale down your arrangement to the size planters that you have. I like to, with a mixed arrangement container, start off with something that has a lot of room for me to play with different colors and textures. And that's another thing you want to keep in mind as well when you're arranging pots. You want to get a good mix of different colors and textures, and all of these evergreens and conifers lend all of that. So the Hollywood juniper is very interesting in its structure and texture. If you needed something a little bit larger, this Bergman Japanese pine is very interesting. And look, it already came decorated with the cones. But some of these larger statuesque conifers are really fantastic. And why use cut berries when we could use the real life thing that we can repot or replant into the garden later on? And so this is this beautiful Ilex Showtime. It's a winter berry and the variety is Showtime. And as you can see, these berries are really plump and big and beautiful. So push this off to the side. And so I'm gonna layer the plants as I go from tall to short. Sort of a little trick that I use. And of course, you can style your planter all around or one-sided. I'm gonna do one-sided for demonstration purposes. Now this beauty is a new Leucotherium. This is a new Leucotherium. Leucotherium is a broadleaf evergreen. It comes variegated or solid green, but it gets a wonderful winter color and usually in the darker reds and so forth. But this variegated one called Sparkle has this beautiful variegated foliage, and the stems are turning this beautiful red color for the winter. Great texture, great color. It's gonna fill and spill a little bit. And in the spring, it gets a beautiful bright pink tip to it. It's really lovely. Some of the Leucotheriums get a bright red tip. This one gets a bright pink tip. And as you can see, I didn't plant it straight up like this. I angled it a little bit so it spills over. Here's another new favorite of mine. This is bog rosemary. It's actually not rosemary. It's in the Andromeda family, and it is a native and loves boggy, wet soils. So when you replant it in the garden, that's where it wants to be. And it is hardy, but it offers this beautiful, almost rosemary-esque texture and color. It has a bluish tone to it, so it just adds another element of color and texture there. I'm gonna cross over here, and I just want to maybe add this little nugget to our mix here. This is green midget arborvitae, and actually this arborvitae is as well a native arborvitae. You want to keep in mind, if you're using arborvitae in your arrangements, they are prone to deer as well as hinoki cypress. And so all of that can be avoided by spraying your arrangement with some deer repellent to make sure that the deer don't come up and say hello and nibble at your arrangement. But this little tuft of arborvitae will add another dimension. And another little element here. This is a very fun little juniper called green owl. Gray owl, bluish gray texture, and it has this sort of wily habit. It's really a sort of ground cover type juniper in the garden. When it comes in containers like this, it has this fun sort of style to it. Grab some soil over here. There we go. Okay. So now I've got my conifers pretty much, and of course, berries and such, filling this pot quite nicely, I think. You could add maybe one more thing to the front here. I really like to stuff my planters. This is tea berry or Gaultheria, and what's lovely about it is that not only does it give us this beautiful berry, the foliage starts to turn this beautiful purpley red color, so it offers, again, another texture and color. Yeah, I would say that's pretty full. How could I possibly fit anything else? So I can. What I love about these planters is that you can make them a little fall styled, and you can easily do that with all of these lovely cut stems and twigs and so forth that are available now. Here we have lots of different types, and most garden centers now carry all of this kind of stuff. But these are just wood slices on a stick, and put those in just to add a little fall element, woodsy. And then maybe you might love a few little pheasant feathers, reminiscent of the Thanksgiving tea bowl or decor. It's a natural, something natural to add. And depending on the space and size that you have, a few bold twigs, these are called doula logs, to add another dimension. And style it in a way that is reminiscent of nature and the woods in sort of fall tones. Maybe even a sprig of berry. It is okay to add artificial elements to your live plants. There's no rules. And you want to make sure that if we have a dry spell or if this planter is under a porch, that you water your planter. These plants are going to transpire, lose moisture in the winter. Just because it's cold doesn't mean that they're not losing that moisture. And so you want to replenish that moisture by watering the planter every so often, not daily or anything like that, maybe once a week, just to make sure nothing is really completely drying out. I would say once we get into the freezing temperatures of January, you don't really worry about it too much. But to prevent over drying out, I highly recommend spraying these plants with wilt-proof. And you're going to spray this just before Thanksgiving. And what it'll do is coat the leaves and prevent those needles and leaves from losing moisture in the winter. And that will protect these plants and ensure that they make it through the winter. And so to transition this planter out of Thanksgiving, you could even add a few little pumpkins and gourds and such. But to easily transition it out of Thanksgiving, removing, maybe leaving the sticks, and adding a little bit of, if you like a little bit of glitz for your holidays, these glittered pine cones are really lovely. And I love how they're on these stems that you can manipulate and let them spill over. Even have some glittered eucalyptus if you wanted it a little glitzy and glammy for the winter.
Jen, while you're doing that, a couple questions came up that might be, this might be a good time to answer. So one question was, I see that you're putting the plants into the planter. Can you talk about both the depth of the dirt, and then when you're putting the plants in, it looked like they're out of the pot, but you didn't score them at all. So could you talk about, or nor did you fill the pot with soil on top. So could you talk about the base a little bit?
So to breeze through the arranging part, I did sort of skip the more horticultural things of what you should do when you're potting. And so let me go back to that. That's really an excellent question. So I did, generally when I plant, I fill the pot up with the soil and leave about a 6-inch gap. That allows me to kind of move the soil around and bury things into the soil properly. When you take, and I pre-took the plants out of their pot so it would be a little bit easier for me to showcase, but basically you do want to score and scratch the roots up, the soil up. And a lot of times, like if I want to squeeze this into a tight space, I really get in there with some of these plants that have a nice loose root system. And don't be afraid to really get your hands in there and shake out that soil to squeeze it into a tight space. Then, I know it's hard to see, but when I'm in here, I'm manipulating the soil around the plant and making sure that it's making contact with those roots and eliminating any air gaps. You want to make sure you eliminate any air gaps, but you don't want to compact the soil so tightly that the roots lose oxygen. So basically, or that you damage the roots too much. And you don't want to pack things in too much. But basically that is what I'm doing and then what I'll do is I'll feel around when I'm done styling the planter. I'll feel around and see if there's any air pockets around the plants, and just grab some handfuls of soil and then pack it around. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Yeah, so the person that asked it said, yes, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent. Okay.
And we're also, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, we're also getting a request for the list of plants that you showed. So we'll share that with the participants at another time, or when, if you wouldn't mind sharing that afterwards.
Absolutely, especially some of those varieties that I mentioned. I'd love to share them with you and then some. So I will compile a list and of materials that I like to use along the way as far as the wilt proof and the deer repellent and so forth. But I'll compile a list and we'll get it out to you email.
That's perfect. And then when you get this all planted like you did today, when would you water it for the first time? So if you were planting—
Always initially. So you always want to water, no matter what you're doing, you always want to water as soon as you've planted. That way everything gets moistened and the soil settles in. You always want to water as soon as you're done planting. And then you would water again, I would say once a week up until the end of December. And then in January and February, you might want to just check every once in a while to see. I know it's kind of hard when things are a little frozen out there, But and generally they've retained enough moisture after those freezes that they do well. And if you did your due diligence with the wilt proof and so forth, you should be fine. It's always a 50-50 shot when you're using plants in a container, because the roots are exposed to the elements more than they would be in the ground. So this is sort of a 50-50 shot, but in my experience, many of these conifers hold up really well, or these evergreens. The tea berry holds up really well. The winterberry, even as a natural plant, not as a cut stem, holds up really well because it's pretty much dormant. You're just using it for the berries. And then you're just lifting that plant out and putting it in the garden. Of course, I would use biotone in the hole. Biotone stimulates the roots and so forth for when you transplant in the spring, and that will ensure that that plant has a good start for the garden.
So let me tell you how the poll turned out too, so you can keep that in mind. I think most people said that they preferred a natural, so what probably more like what you have here, and then traditional, and then contemporary or modern. So it put a pretty good split, maybe 50, okay. 30, 20.
All right, excellent. So I'm just gonna take these out real quick and show you a couple of more plants that I love. I promise these will all be, I know I roughhoused them a little bit, but they will all be nurtured and reused. And more specimens that I have here to show you. This is jade pillar boxwood. I know a lot of you love using boxwood. Boxwoods are wonderful to use in containers. They tend to do pretty well in containers. Some are hardier than others. The Korean boxwood hybrids tend to do the best. And of course, if you visit us, we will be more than happy to show you the varieties that seem to do the best in the winters in a container. Jade pillar naturally grows pyramidal, which makes it a wonderful choice for leaving in the container long term because of its the ability to shape it nicely, and it just looks great in a pot. It also is one of those hybrids that seems to be very disease resistant, and spritz of wilt proof, and you should be good to go for the winter. And to make this a little more contemporary, I might add some of these bog rosemaries around. So you don't have to get too mixed and crazy with your containers. You can do something much more simplified. As just the boxwood in the center with these beautiful rosemaries. And then of course, for the holidays, if you wanted to add an element of something, you could do live berries or add these wonderful artificial berries that add a little pop and a little bit of glitz. A lot of these things are very weatherproof now. And so they work really well through the holidays. And then when you're done with holiday decor, you just pluck them right out. But basically just something very simple and very contemporary. You might add like a big chunky cone, or we might even add a few cut stems if you wanted to keep it more natural. So just layering in some magnolia leaf. Again, you can't go wrong when you use different colors and different textures. Just keep in mind when you're choosing your material that everything has a different color and texture for some depth. And that is just very simple and a little more contemporary. Of course, super, super contemporary, I think, would be lends itself to the cut stems and so forth, using big, tall branches with just some cut greenery at the base. You can make it look very easily, very contemporary, which will now segue into our cut stem arranging. So I think at this time, I'd love to entertain any more questions anyone has, especially about using live plants. And I will open that up to Kirsten or Patricia, if there's any questions out there so far. I know.
Sure, I'll help you out here. So we had a couple of questions. So just one is, can you repeat the name of the short green that you used? I think that was
this one.
Was that the one, Jeannie, that you were looking for? I think so.
Yeah, the rosemary.
Bog rosemary.
Right.
And it's also, it's a type of Andromeda, but bog rosemary.
Okay, and that was one question. And then another one, and I think maybe this is going to come a good segue into where you're headed next. You know, if we all are thinking about being economical in our approach here and don't necessarily have the luxury of going out and purchasing all new plants, how can we still, decorate with pots during the winter? Maybe I'll be so bold as to say using what's in our backyard without having to, make an investment in new plants.
Right. So I would say using live plants, sort of, if you really love gardening, or even if you're just thinking about adding new plants to your landscape, I think it's a great way to invest in those plants and utilize them to your advantage for your planters, but then you get to incorporate them into the garden. So I think, it's a great investment to make using plants this way. But of course, we are all on a budget and so forth. So, and if you don't want to invest in some of these, plants can get kind of costly, but you'd be surprised how many of them are pretty affordable. I was using quite large container size plants, but we have sort of 1 gallon and smaller planters. Of course, your planters might be a little bit smaller too. So you would use smaller material, and it actually is quite affordable. So I would look at it that way. But of course, to segue into the cut stem arranging, you can certainly harvest from your yard many of these things. I did that this morning because many of these cut greens aren't available yet. They're just being flown in and crossing the country and so forth and making their way to garden centers across the country just now. And so I went out this morning, I shouldn't say, Peter went out this morning for me and harvested some lovely greens for me to use in today's workshop. So certainly a lot of these greens that I'm going to be using are probably things that you have in your yard already. And I will mention some of the things to look for that would work really nicely. So why don't I go through some of the components I'm going to use today. Well, before I do that, are there any more questions about the first segment?
Well, Jen, someone asked if there are any pests to worry about with these plants in the winter. Of course, the deer, but other than that.
No, but that's an excellent question. You want to be, in terms of pests, the only thing that I can think of that we were particularly sensitive to last year was boxwood blight. And even boxwood leaf miner. Peter and I have refused not just plants, but cut boxwood numerous occasions because we knew how to identify boxwood blight or leaf miner in the, not just live plants, but in the cut material as well. And so you really do want to be careful about if you're harvesting on your own, especially if it's not in your own yard, where material is coming from. Another thing that you really want to be aware of, I don't know if any of you have heard of the spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly is making its way to our area. Unfortunately, I hope it stays at bay, but it seems to be making its way this way. I know agricultural is doing a tremendous job, Connecticut and New York, of keeping it out and inspecting material regularly that's crossing state lines. It's a rampant problem in Pennsylvania. And so what I would love for everyone to do is just Google spotted lanternfly. You could look on the Yukon Extension website or even the Cornell Extension website. They have information about spotted lanternfly, and look at what it, not just what the actual insect looks like, but what the eggs look like and so forth. We have seen cut birch logs with spotted lanternfly egg cases, egg masses on, that we then turned over to the DEC. And now they're being, this is several years ago, so now they're being very vigilant in inspecting all of this material coming in. So I know a lot of people love using those big birch logs just when you're purchasing them. We're looking out for it very vigilantly, but look in see what those egg cases and what the insect looks like, the evidence of it, and look out for that when you're purchasing your material or even looking for your material on your own. So I would say spotted lanternfly and boxwood blight and boxwood leaf miner are the things that I would look out for in terms of pests when you're collecting material or when you're even purchasing the plants themselves. So I know that was a really long answer, sorry. It's the horticulturist in me. Okay. Any other
You mentioned boxwood, so we got a question about using jade pillar boxwood. Would that survive in the winter?
Okay, so boxwood in general is always touch and go. It's a broadleaf evergreen, so it does lose moisture. Just as a hollywood, you know, like this, you know, this is cut holly leaf, but basically this surface is exposed to drying more than a needled conifer. And so they will lose moisture in the winter more readily, and thus you won't see them die a lot of times until like March, you know, end of March, even beginning of April sometimes, and it's due to winter injury. So the wilt proof will protect the boxwood more, and The jade pillar is one of the hardier ones. Little Missy is a dwarf boxwood that is incredibly hardy, it seems. We've used it in planters for the last few years and it's been holding up really nicely. It's also incredibly disease resistant, but that's a shorter, more rounded boxwood. If you're looking for something to use in window boxes, that's an excellent choice, Little Missy. So when you're looking to purchase them, a lot of times you'll see in the smaller planters English boxwood being offered, and the English boxwood just aren't going to be very hardy, and they're also highly disease susceptible. And so you want to look for Little Missy. It is becoming more readily available. It is more expensive because of the patenting and so forth, but after the winter, you could take those Little Missies and put them out in the garden and know that you've got a highly resistant boxwood. Or you may even be able to leave those boxwood in your planters, depending on what you're doing. We've seen Little Missies survive in planters a number of seasons without being removed. So, okay. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on to the cut green segment. Kirsten, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, we are. We're good.
I don't see my screen, so I'm sorry. I'm like, I know I have enough power, but I just want to make sure, like, you know, the signal didn't go out or something.
Oh, you're doing great. Thanks.
Oh, good. Okay. So, thrill, fill, and spill. We're going to still utilize that sort of mantra for designing with our cut greens. And I've prepped this planter and kept the soil all the way up to the rim. I want as much height out of the soil as I can. My soil is my oasis, floral oasis. So I use the soil to design my cut stem planters. Some people do use blocks of oasis. I don't really like using the oasis. It can freeze really quickly. The soil, I can at least manipulate if it does get really cold and I need to still do arranging and it's kind of frozen up. I could take a blowtorch and little handheld blowtorch and thaw out the soil and work it and then get my stems in. So I don't really like using oasis. It's also not a great material for our environment. So soil's great for me. So the way I go about starting my design is I think about my height piece first, and then I build out around it from there. So I think I am going to start with these beautiful doula logs again. And I'm just going to center those. And I love these because they have so much interest in architecture. And then I think I want to get a little holiday color in there. And so I'm going to use these red twigs. And these are painted birch, but certainly I prefer personally to use red twig dogwood. We also get yellow twig dogwood and flame willow, which is a beautiful orangey color. And I don't necessarily always choose holiday colors. I tend to just like using the natural colors. You can always add a little bit of berry or glitz or glam for the holidays and then take that away and you have color still, but not necessarily holiday looking. But those natural branches, so the dogwoods and the flame willow, and even pussy willow, I get beautiful pussy willow that has the caps still on the pussy willow buds. So you don't see the fuzzy buds, but you see the beautiful red caps on them. And I use those as my center. And then I leave them in the spring because those caps fall off, and then you see the beautiful soft little pussy willow buds. Those will be coming in soon. The growers had to wait for a nice hard frost to knock all the leaves off of those natural plants, and then they cut and harvest. Of course, with the cold, the color really starts to become more vibrant in those red twig dogwoods and so forth. So now I am going to start to fill. And I like to get a little more height out of the greens. So I'm using this arborvitae. This is just green giant arborvitae. I know a lot of you have been using green giant arborvitae in your screening in your landscape. And so sneak out there. Don't let your husbands see. No, I'm teasing. I always have to sneak around the nursery, not let Peter see me snipping things that I want. But the green giant arborvitae is very readily available in your yard, but it will be also available as bunches at a very reasonable price. So I'm just sticking the stems into the soil and creating a new layer. Now I want a little bit of different texture. Again, still thinking about filling. And so I'm going to use this beautiful pine. Now I will say pine is becoming less and less available. It does have a disease running around on it. It has an insect that in production has been very rampant, and the price of pine is actually increasing significantly. So white pine roping, you'll see, is going to be pretty expensive. But if you're lucky enough to have some pines in your yard, grab a clipper and clip away. These came from my backyard. And again, I'm just layering this pine in between those arborvitae stems. Let's see. This is actually another kind of arborvitae. This is dark American arborvitae. And as you can see, it's a little wispier, it's not as dense, and it has a really pretty thicker stem on it. And so it offers another texture as well. So in this arrangement, I'm really keeping the height of the branches and accenting it lower with the cut greens. Okay. Next. Again, another texture. This is beautiful umbrella pine. I am lucky enough to have a big, 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 beautiful specimen in my yard. There are a number of other options that you'll find in bunches available at the garden center. I just happen to have this umbrella pine that is so fun. An umbrella pine is very hardy. It holds up to the cold really well, so it does hold up in the container pretty well. The other thing about using soil is that these cut stems are gonna grab a little bit of moisture from the soil before it freezes. And so the soil actually keeps them fresher. All right. Now, I know many of you love magnolia, and I love magnolia too, just because it adds such a bold leaf and beautiful texture. You don't have to add tons of it, just a smidge here and there. It has gotten a lot more affordable since, I think, a few years back. I think production has increased, and we'll see with the dry season that we had if it'll still be readily available, but I think it should be. I was able to get it. It is available now, especially for Thanksgiving arrangements and so forth. People like that brown underside of the leaf. And then here it is. So we have some incense cedar, and the incense cedar has these beautiful sort of yellowy buds at the ends. When we purchase it in from the West Coast, it seems to be much heavier budded. And so this is not something you may find readily in your yard. And so garden centers usually have plenty of it. I know we do, and it comes very heavily budded with this beautiful gold cone at the, or bud, I should say, at the bottom. And that's what I like to use for that element of drip. Peter was unable to find very much of it for me, but just enough. Sorry. Right. So I think we look nice and full and lush there. You could see that I didn't use very many stems of each thing. That layering technique really helps a lot. And so just to make it a little more festive and holiday, I think, yeah, maybe I'll leave the red in. There's so many fun and different types of stems that you could use now. I love this one. This is called natrag. It's an actual tree that grows in Canada, and it forms this beautiful shape, almost like an antler. And I love using them in arrangements. Here. Sorry. So, adding my little antlers here.
So Jen, one question we got is, would you water a arrangement like this?
Yes. So when you're done arranging, you're gonna water. It's gonna moisten that soil because these stems are drinking a bit, and it'll keep those stems hydrated for as long as possible until we really get a freeze, and then you should be good to go. Just the one time. I wouldn't water it, you know, as frequently as you would with the live plants. And especially you don't want to saturate the planter, especially these things aren't sucking up that much water. And so you don't want to saturate the planter before it freezes, because then it's gonna be more likely to freeze, expand, and then break the planter. And then I'm just adding these berry clusters. And do not ask me what kind of berries these are, because they're faux. But they're a really nice faux, I think. They're just a little fun and less likely to be eaten by the birds and disappearing on you because of that. Another thing I love to use, this looks like real juniper, but it's not. It's faux juniper, but it has such a real look to it. I love using the faux juniper because the live juniper tends to brown out. It's pretty stinky, and the berries tend to shatter, especially when it gets really cold. They just fall off or turn brown or black. But certainly, if you have beautiful juniper growing in your yard, by all means, harvest it. And especially if you harvest your own, you know, one of the advantages of harvesting your own greenery is that the freshness, right? So a lot of the bunches that we're getting in are harvested, you know, 2 to 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, kept cold. And with the cold temperatures and with the wilt proofing and so forth that we're going to do, will hold up pretty nicely. But of course, your own cut greens are going to last a lot longer. And I'm really layering this on, but I want to show you different things. Of course, if you want to add a little bit of glitz, you can, or keep it more natural. There's all kinds of fun elements that you can add. These grapevine balls are a lot of fun to add, and I would just tuck that in. And before you do that, you could wrap this with these cute little fairy lights. A lot of these lights are now coming with waterproof battery packs. So you tuck the battery pack in the background somewhere and it's fairly waterproof. And once you turn the lights on, it has a timer. So you turn them on at 5 o'clock and they will stay on for 6 or 8 hours, turn off, and then automatically come on without you having to switch on and off the next day at that 5 o'clock. So a lot of them, the nicer quality ones are really great to use and adds a little lighted element. You could wrap it around this grapevine ball, or you could just snake them in between the greenery, and it adds that little bit of festiveness and life to the planter. And certainly, you know, different other elements that I love to use. Seeded eucalyptus, as you can see, is beautiful. It's nice broad bluish leaf with the buds at the ends that are really pretty. It holds up pretty well in the planter. I will say once it gets really cold, like in January, you'll see it start to what I call shatter. The leaves will start to fall off or flake off, but it holds up for the holidays at least. I absolutely love, 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 love these. This is actually a type of eucalyptus. It's called silver bells, but it's the bud or the pod of a specific type of eucalyptus. And they're just so much fun to work into a planter. It's like a nice natural element. Something other than using, you know, the traditional pine cones and so forth, but it has that bluish silvery color and it's just a lot of fun to work with. Branches, again, the jay branches or the birch branches are coming in all different colors. I don't know if you can notice, but that's more of a gray for all of us that are on the gray train. And this beautiful blue, for those of us that want something a little non-traditional. Of course, we have, for people that are a little more contemporary, these fun little swirls. These are just reed that are taken and painted and then held together in that swirl. So those can be kind of fun. If this wasn't more natural, I would do the same base, evergreen base, maybe your red twigs, and then these cute little white swirls running through the container would make it look a little more contemporary. And now we're even seeing more and more available to us that make arranging easier. These mixed bunches are available. These have a little bit of shimmer to them. So left to look more natural, but have like a little icing on it. You have the grapevine star, you have the branches for your height, and then these really nice cones that are on the pick that you can pick into the arrangement as well. So this, using the soil really holds everything very nicely and allows you to really play with the arrangement, I think, much better. Because if you're using Oasis, I'm sure if you've used in flower arranging Oasis before, you know, especially with these thicker stems, the Oasis starts to break down and break apart, and it's a little cumbersome. So soil works really nicely. So are there any questions about arranging with cut greens? Oh, before I do that, I'm sorry. Last thing, after you've done your arranging, again, wilt proof. Just like with the live plants, you want to give this a really good spritzing until you see it dripping off of the greenery. That will preserve the greenery really well. Some of the greenery that we get in, we actually pre-treat with wilt proof. We mix it in a big backpack sprayer, and there's certain things like boxwood and magnolia that we know loses moisture heavily through the winter. We actually pre-treat those cut greens with wilt proof, but it wouldn't hurt to treat again once you've used them in your arrangement. So yeah, that I think covers it. If anybody has any questions about cut arranging.
Hey, Jen, so well done. Everybody's applauding you. Very entertaining.
Oh,
very informative.
Thank you.
So, very good. I am curious, do you have to use the wilt proof multiple times during the season, or is that just applying when you put it in?
No, just once actually. So we always recommend using it just before Thanksgiving. The temperatures really have to come down. And certain things like spruces really don't like the application of the wilt proof until the temperatures have really dropped. So sometimes like right before Thanksgiving or even after Thanksgiving is when you want to apply it. And it only requires once. Once it dries, it takes about 12 hours to dry fully. But once it's dried on the plant, it's actually a natural wax coating, a natural plant wax coating. And it just adheres to the foliage and seals in that foliage from losing moisture. So just the one application is plenty.
Okay, and then speaking of spruces, is that a spruce that's on the table that you didn't use?
Yes, I didn't use this poor little guy, and I really wanted to talk about him. So this is Black Hills spruce. It is Picea glauca. Black Hills is a selection that was found in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Beautiful selection. It is such a nice choice when you're choosing plants for screening and so forth, but this little baby is so adorable to use in a container, and then at the end of the winter, transplant and watch it grow and become a beautiful screening tree in your garden or in your yard. It has a beautiful shape to it as it matures. Picea glauca is a native spruce. And this selection, the Black Hills, has a nice, like, sort of soft silvery color to it, almost bluish tone. For a spruce, the needles are quite friendly. And yeah, Google the mature photos of the Picea glauca, Black Hills. So you could get a sense of what it looks like mature, but it's just a beautiful little spruce to use. And, you know, a nice traditional choice to use in a container, you know, I would center this, throw a few little lights on it, maybe skirt it with some berries and cones and call it a holiday. But I love using these little spruce trees in the center of a pot. It's a simple way of arranging your pot, but it makes quite a statement, especially if you put the little lights on. It looks really nice.
And someone asked, excuse me, about the fairy lights. What's the brand of them? And
Whatever brand I can get my hands on.
okay.
Well, okay, so that being said, so we get our lights from multiple different vendors, and it's kind of been a trial and error of what I like and what seems to hold up to the cold and the elements really well. Many of these, so I would say Sylvania is a brand that I have been able to find that has a waterproof battery pack. So what I'll say is, when you're looking for them to use outside, you want to look to see if the package says indoor, outdoor, that they're labeled for outdoor use. Many of them don't say if they are cold resistant, but some of the brands, like we have a brand called S4 that is specifically tested to withstand extreme cold temperatures. But for the most part, as long as the battery pack is waterproof, you should be good to go. And if the package says it's for indoor or outdoor use, what that means is that the wire and the bulb has been treated as such that it'll withstand, you know, water and so forth. So these tiny little lights that'll light up have been coated in a way, and the wire has been coated in a way that'll withstand outdoor use. And the battery box has this gasket running around it to make sure that none of the moisture doesn't get into the box and into the batteries. And so I also look for ones that, this one is a small set, so it runs on 3 AA batteries. On larger trees, we have them, larger battery sets that run on C or D batteries, and I find that you get a lot more longevity out of the battery and not have to switch the batteries out halfway through the holiday with the C and D battery packs than you do with the AA's. So that's another thing that I look for in the lights. But we have multiple different kinds, but most of the ones that I have are labeled for outdoor use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a fun addition to this whole process. They're really lovely.
They really are.
Yeah. Someone was asking if your garden shop, when your Christmas shop opens. I guess is it partly open now? Or?
It is, and so you'll see. So our garden shop, our holiday shop, will be located in our greenhouse this year. The indoor portion that you see here behind me is a small portion of the store that we have decided to open to 1 or 2 persons at a time. In here, our greenhouse is not heated, and so inside the store here, we can maintain our plants. And so our house plants, our lemon cypress, our amaryllis, our cyclamen, eventually our poinsettias, and the beautiful indoor gardens that we make up for the holidays. And so we will be allowing people in here 1 or 2 at a time to keep things safe. The Christmas shop is located in the greenhouse this year, and if you've ever been here, it's a big, beautiful space. It's empty for the most part for the winter. So we said, why not utilize this big, beautiful open space? It's going to be a little chilly, but I think it'll be a much safer environment to have our Christmas shop, and we're creating all these beautiful vignettes. I think it'll be ready, fully set up in another week or two. And but please come in and see what we've got out there so far, because it's really pretty, and the girls and guys are busy setting up all these pretty little vignettes out there, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think the fact that it'll be cool out there will add to the atmosphere.
Yes, we will be stringing lots of cafe lights out there. We're going to have Friday evening shopping hours from 6 to 9. And so we'll be serving hot chocolate and hot cider during those hours as well, to make it give you that feel of maybe shopping a little Kringle Mart in Europe or something. And so we're really excited and looking forward to bringing the holidays in.
Okay, one more question, kind of back to the very beginning. When you have a planter, especially one like the one you're working with that's so tall,
Yeah.
It would actually hold a tremendous amount of soil.
Yes.
So do you ever use anything like empty plastic water bottles or something like that to put it on the bottom so that it's not so heavy, first of all?
So I'm not as concerned about the weight, and especially when, depending on what I want to arrange in the pot and how much soil I need. If I'm getting into using some of these evergreens as permanents, I want that soil depth. And if you've got the pot where it's got to go and it has good drainage, I would recommend not moving it unless it's a very sensitive material that you have to bring in and store for the winter. Generally, I like to leave the pot where it is and not fuss with it, so that it's not susceptible when you're moving it to cracking and things like that. So I'm not too concerned about the weight itself, especially if I need the soil volume for a larger plant. Now, if I'm only arranging mostly small container plants or like flowers eventually for spring and summer, and it's quite a bit of space and volume to the planter, I do use what's available to me. And so oftentimes it's the empty pots from the plants, and I just flip them upside down, and that takes up some volume. And then when you put the soil in, it just fills in around, you make sure it fills in around the gaps and so forth and settles, so you don't get too much soil settling, but it gives you those air pockets and drainage as well. So a lot of people use bark chips or bark nuggets, and I use that from time to time too. The problem with bark nuggets is that it is a natural material, and it will break down over time, and water will settle into it. And so sometimes you end up with a swampier situation than what you want after those bark nuggets start to break down. And so I prefer to use either, those flipped over pots in the bottom, or that soil perfector that I mentioned. It comes in a yellowish bag with a beautiful photo on it. It's from Espoma. And it's basically these clay nuggets that actually people use to add to garden soils to add aeration and loosen up tough, heavy soils. But I use that just straight in the bottom, maybe a few inches in containers to allow for drainage. It looks like, it's not a clay nugget, I'm sorry. It's like a gypsum or some kind of lava stone. And it's pretty light, and it has lots of air pockets in it, the stone itself. And so it sort of adds oxygen and air to the soil, but it also absorbs a little bit of moisture too if it settles in the bottom. Charcoal is another one that some people use too, charcoal briquettes, because it's just like using charcoal in a small indoor planter or charcoal in an aquarium. It absorbs any ickiness that might settle in the bottom of the planter. So charcoal is another option too.
Somebody was asking about doing something like this as a tablescape. I guess some different things would apply because it's inside, but
Yeah.
do you have any comments?
Yeah, so just scale it down to whatever, table you're using and container you're using, a low bowl, or even as an entry piece, either the live plants or the cut. I would say probably because of the warm environment in the home, the plants might struggle a little bit, but you would up the watering, increase the watering frequency, just like you would with a house plant. The plants aren't going through a cold period, so there would have to be some acclimating done before you set those plants out to the garden after the winter. And so I would probably lean towards using cut greens, but the problem with cut greens inside, of course, is that it's so warm that they dry out fairly quickly. If you spritz the greens, I would wilt proof, but then also mist the greens occasionally just to try to keep them on the fresher side. But you can usually get an arrangement to last a month, maybe even 2. And even as it dries, the foliage can hold its color fairly well. And so you might get into January with the arrangement with cut greens. And then, eventually you'd have to throw them into the compost. But with the live plants, certainly we also have more tender houseplant type of plants that you can use and still get that Christmas look. This is lemon cypress. I'm sure you've seen this around. It comes as a topiary. It has a beautiful lemony scent when you rub the leaves. It looks like an evergreen, and it is. It's in the cypress family, but it is not hardy to our climate. So you can't use this outside, but it certainly makes a beautiful indoor plant to use for the holidays. And I might style this with some miniature cyclamen or some other foliage plants to accent it and use this as a nice centerpiece inside and still get that Christmassy look or that holiday look.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we're just about finished. Somebody just asked if you can use pumice as a draining medium.
Yes, you can. And I'm finding that it's harder to find. There was a white sort of pumice stone that was being sold. I carried it in large bags. I forget the name of the brand, but yes, pumice stone would work really well. I've just found that company went out of business and I haven't been able to find it. I have seen it available in smaller bags for use with dish gardens and terrariums. So it's like a white pumice stone. But certainly if you find it available in large bags, snag that because it works really well. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we could go on all day listening to you. You just are
Thank you.
so much fun. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. You had such an informative talk. It was really enlightening. I'm ready to drive up to Copia Garden Center and put a planter together right now.
Oh.
So many incredible choices you've given us. I'm really, really thankful for your talk.
Oh,
Thank everybody else for participating. We had well over 100 people, so I'm really pleased, and I think that'll make you happy. And I suggest everyone go to our website to learn of upcoming events and speakers. And we will have an email sent to the members and the New Canaan Garden Club regarding our wreath workshop on December 2. And look for it. And the logistics are still being worked out, and I think that's because of the COVID. We're not going to have a meeting in December, but we look forward to the new year. That's going to be kind of exciting. Please check our website to see what's coming up. But I can tell you we have a wonderful speaker on Wednesday, January 6th, and it's entitled The Art of Gardening Chanticleer by Bill Thomas. It will be an artistic virtual tour of the garden, which is located in Pennsylvania. And this is something you really don't want to miss. So thanks again for attending, everybody, and have a good day. And that's about it for me.